Well, hello everyone. It's true, I did used to sell mattresses. Believe it or not, I would go in and I'd be working, people would come into the mattress store. How many people have bought a mattress here before? Probably everyone, right? Yeah, obviously. And so they'd come in and kind of walk around, look at everything. Go, this is a good mattress. I like this mattress. This is a good one. And so I would just sit there and look at them and just think to myself, what are you doing? Do you do this at home? No, lay down on the mattress. Some people, they'll get up and jump up and down on the mattress. Do something. No one just does this. Come on, do something. Anyway, so what we're going to be talking to you today a little bit about here is understanding, what SPM is, not just kind of testing it. How does it apply to you? We're going to go through a sales performance management market definition. I know you've all seen this probably about 5 or 10 times in this past hour, but we're going to go ahead and go through it because I think what most people don't do is understand how they build from other systems. We see the links, but really what is it that builds into sales performance management? We're also going to go through a 5-step process of how you implement an effective sales performance management coaching system, how it's applicable, and where we've seen it used in real customer situations. We're also going to go through market evolution so everybody understands where we were and where we came to, and we're going to wrap up with some key takeaways and best practices. Okay. So here's sales performance management. What we see is sales performance management isn't incentive compensation. It's not customer relationship management. It's really built on. And by the show of hands from people who were at Hayes the other night, I can tell that this is actually really new material, probably not remembered from yesterday. So what you see is with customer relationship management, you really are talking about sales funnel management as it pertains to your sales organization. As we continue further into incentive compensation management, that really builds on that funnel process and goes into compensation. And this is where a lot of people that we've worked with traditionally at CallidusCloud have been. And as they expand, they're going to be expanding into sales performance management. But ICM itself is really just goal and territory management. It's compensation, it's reporting and analytics, and it rounds itself around that piece of the system. And then if you get to sales performance management, you're talking about things like we're hearing now, selection and hiring, onboarding, also goals and territory management, wrapped in sales performance management. And we're going to specifically talk with Dave today about performance and coaching. So we'll end up with that piece and some key takeaways from performance and coaching. But before we do that, I'd like to go through and take us through a market evolution of places where we've been, how things have built on each other, and where we're at right now from a market evolution perspective. So if you think about it, I can remember sitting in, I know Derek Russ is in here somewhere. He begged me not to say his name, but I can remember sitting with Derek Russ at the very beginning, say around 2000, 2003, and our friends at Enron had created a situation where everybody needed to have audit because there were SOX compliancy issues. And we would sit in a room, Derek and I, with customers that, Canidium's a hard name to pronounce, and it took this guy three years to pronounce Callidus. It was Collidus for the longest time. But he eventually got there, and if you think about it, at the beginning, little things like SOX compliancy, like basic calculations, just the fundamentals is where we were back in 2000. And we started going further into 2003, right? You saw tactical issues, speed, accuracy of reporting, hierarchy management, draws and recovery. These were things that were big to people at that point in time. And we started drawing and gaining more momentum as we started going further. And in 2006, we started seeing quota and territory management. We're starting to see the building blocks. It's starting to build on it. We're starting to get closer to that picture of sales performance management that we have right now. And I think about 2009, I was sitting in a room with Dave Robles right over there from Genentech, Sean Jackson, I don't see him in here, he can raise his hand, and Jennifer Bouillet. And we're talking about reporting and analytics and how reporting and analytics is also going to drive behavior and finance, right? So those things around reporting and analytics specifically for their organization were things that they were addressing and adopting actually back in 2008. I remember the very conversation sitting with you, Dave. And as we come forward to 2012, we're seeing this all start to come together. Everybody's moving forward. We're starting to see sales coaching and a lot of the things that CallidusCloud is doing right now. You're doing a combination of calculation. You have workflow and reporting. You have upfront sales engagement. It's the shift of where sales performance management is going to. And I'm going to hand over to Dave here, and he's actually going to go into some of those shifts and some of those processes. Dave?
Cool. Thanks, Doug. True story, Doug and I actually gave a similar presentation a week or so ago, and after the presentation, this elderly lady comes up and says, Doug, has anybody ever told you you're a really good speaker? He says, well, no. She said, well, then why do you still do it?
I don't remember that.
Thanks, Doug. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why this is important. And you don't have to take our word for it. There's plenty of industry analysts, great consulting companies. Many of you are in the room right now. And if Steve Potts is out there, I actually blatantly stole this slide from you just to get that out. So I think, Peter, you just mentioned that any good analyst usually steals slides, so I'm burgling the burglar here. But so why is it important? A couple of key notes here. Selling is by far the most important and least understood critical success factor of your company. And I'm in sales. I love to hear this. Who doesn't, right? We're the lifeblood of the company. Every salesperson, every good salesperson has a pretty good ego. You just have to keep it in check. But this particular point reminds me a lot of the Moneyball story. And most of you are probably familiar. If you're into sports, you know it. If you're into Brad Pitt, you really now know it after the movie came out. But it's a great story. I actually heard Billy Beane speak last week. Speaking of burgling the burglar, he'll admit that it was not his idea. He just hired a bunch of smart people from MIT. We think there's a similar story to be told here within the sales organization. The point here being that we've never really understood it, right? You sell, you hit your number, good on you. You don't, you're fired. It's just that simple. But if we really start to look at what are the critical success factors, pop the hood, really start to understand the metrics. There's just an opportunity here to really look, at a more analytical level and be smarter about, what's driving performance. How do we measure that? How do we bring that back into the coaching profile? We're going to see this in a few slides around, looking at key metrics. Some other points here on why it's important. We all know this. Managers are spending, essentially you're estimating 2 hours per day. We know it's a lot, but the point here is you've got a lot of people searching for data. When they find it, it may be useless. So, that could be time spent in coaching. It could be time spent in selling. But we're spending a lot of time looking for data that may or may not be helpful. We've got a lot of people who aren't hitting quota. I mean, where else is it okay that half your teams don't hit performance? We've also got high turnover. Why is that? Well, again, in sales, you're there to make money. We just saw the numbers. Salespeople are driven by metrics and numbers. If you're not making money, you're going to leave. Conversely, you may want them to leave the organization. So you could be managing out a lot of people that you could be managing to a higher level of performance if you really understood how to do that. And of course, the cost of hiring, of a hiring misfire, can be astronomical. Estimated here at 2 to 3x the fully loaded compensation rate. So a lot of money, flying out the window within a very short period of time. So we know it's important. Those are just some numbers, and I just wanted to throw up some validation from industry analysts. Why else is this important? Well, where is it applicable? We're here at this conference to talk a lot about, the sales teams, right? So we're looking at sales performance management. But if we just take the word sales off of this, and you start to look at some of those applications like the, Callidus suite, couldn't this be applicable in other areas of your organization? And in fact, we're seeing, the trend, of course, moving into like a service to sales type transformation in the call center. So, of course, it's applicable in a call center. I've worked with companies in like collections where every time they call you and say you're late on your credit card bill and you need to make a $50 payment today, that agent's getting comped on that. So we're starting to, really converge these historical service organizations with sales. Field service, no different. There could be cross-sell opportunities. Retail channels, that's pretty obvious. Back office. The point being here, you've got tools now that can be, extendable across the entire enterprise. So if you're a customer, I think that's important because if you're looking for applications, you've now got purchasing partners throughout your organization, right? If I'm a Callidus sales rep, I'm really excited with sales coaching because now I can go into not just the historical teams where we focused on the ICM deployments, but we can look into call centers and anything else around the wheel because this application is applicable across the enterprise. So it is very important, right? It doesn't just drive performance in your sales teams, it drives performance in every area of the organization. I can't think of one of these around the wheel where performance isn't important. Okay, so we know it's important. Why aren't we doing it? Well, it's not easy, right? There's a lot of challenges. You got to work your way through the maze of data, figuring out what's important. No shortage of challenges. One of the ones we always hear with Doug, why can't I coach people effectively? Well, I can't see the numbers. I can't pull it all together. Well, why can't you see it? Well, there's probably a lack of the proper tools. I'm looking, at a spreadsheet for numbers. I'm looking at a coaching log over here. And not only, am I looking into one place, Doug, who's sort of my counterpart sales manager, he's looking at an entire different place. So that leads to unclear goals because what's important to me and my team may be different to what's important to Doug and his team, but we both report to the same person, so they should have, they should be looking at a similar set of metrics and a coaching methodology. So no shortage of challenges. It could take a poll. I'm sure you all have dealt with several or all of these throughout your course of time. So we know it's important, but what we're seeing, of course, is those who focus on it reap the benefit and the dividend. Peter had a lot of good information to prove that those who focus really do outperform. I want to use this. It's a study by the Sales Effectiveness Council. Let's break this down a little bit, not to get too statistical. And I actually had somebody call me out on this last week when I presented it. We're not talking about variation here and reducing variability so much as what we're talking about is an entire performance shift. But let me explain this. So the leftmost bell curve is really a study of the population with what was deemed poor coaching effectiveness, and the right-hand curve were those with, deemed to have highly effective coaching performance. So what we're really looking at here, there are a couple of interesting points, right? One is where do you spend time? I think a lot of you have seen this before, but to reiterate, where can you have a dramatic shift in the organization? It's not coaching the low performers, right? You can't, as Steve Potts says, you can't coach a dog out of a kennel. We all know that. It's validated through data. And conversely, at the high end of the curve, sure, you can spend some time. It's more attaboys, maybe actually benchmarking for best practices, that sort of thing. But where you're going to get the real shift in performance is in the middle, right? Potential performers, whatever you want to call them. And in fact, in this particular study, they estimated, I think conservatively, that those with highly effective coaching practices had about 17% of their teams, hit or exceed their attainment. But I think what's even more interesting is this is not one for one, right? So of those 17%, as they shift, a deeper study has shown that the further right you go on this particular curve, you're hitting not just 1x your attainment, but you're starting to move up towards 2x or 3x. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. You've got 17% of the population maybe moving over, but what's that really mean to your top line? It's exponential. So that's a potential benefit. And again, why is this important? Focusing on just a subset of your organization can have a dramatic effect in your overall revenue result. So some pretty compelling evidence there. Okay, so where to start? We like to walk companies through just kind of a 5-step process. We're going to break these down at somewhat of a high level. We actually have a breakout session later today at 2 o'clock. I think it's called Implementing an Effective SPM Program. We're going to break these down in a little bit more detail, so come by if you're interested. I would also invite any of you companies that, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan's here, Stanley, Kimberly-Clark, any of you, please stop by. We actually would like to hear your stories. We can turn this into more of an open session later today, and you can tell us kind of the process you went through. But here's what Doug and I have taken some companies through. First is just defining the metrics. We've all talked about the right metrics, but I want to talk about kind of two components. One is finding the right metrics. That's the Moneyball story. Leading versus lagging, we're calling it. But what's really driving performance? How can we measure the leading indicators to steer the ship in a different direction? So we know that story. What I want to talk about a little bit here is how do we connect the front line to the corporate goals, right? Because at a high level, we're talking about pretty vague things if you talk about a sales, a field salesperson or a call center agent. At a corporate level, they're fairly generic. We've got to increase revenue. We need to reduce costs. We've got to drive shareholder value. Well, a few slides ago, I mentioned this being applicable in all, business units. Let's talk about a call center. So you've got a call center agent. we've probably historically, Dan from Hilton and I were talking about this yesterday, historically we're just asking them to get on the phone, resolve the issue, and get off the phone. But we're seeing these service to sales type transformations. What's that really mean to that frontline agent if we just say you need to increase revenue or reduce costs? It doesn't. So we've got to break the corporate goals down into a frontline metric. But even if we just said, okay, we need to increase revenue per call or focus on high margin products, those aren't really the levers that I can pull to make that happen. So that's where we're taking it to the next step. And into the coaching profiles, we really need to be building the coachable behaviors. Those are the levers that we can pull that if we coach to those, they're going to have the impact on the frontline metrics, which then align to the corporate goal. Right? So easy to say, not easy to do, and it takes a tremendous amount of work and evaluation and alignment throughout the entire organization. But I think there was a really good slide, Peter, that you showed about those metrics. What are they? So they need to be the right ones. They need to be leading indicators, as well as what we historically have called the lagging. Those are more the results. Those could come from a CPQ. They could come from Salesforce. They tend to be, really the downloads and the inputs into a coaching application. But these leading indicators are the ones that really connect with the front lines. Those are the ones that they understand. They have a direct impact on these corporate goals. Okay, so that's step one, defining the right metrics. Of course, we'll talk about that later today. Step two, I call this data, it says aggregation, but I think more, probably data aggravation and distribution is more appropriate. So we've talked a little bit about this. I don't think we need to kill the horse here, but you'll all understand, we're pulling data in. But I want to talk about a couple things, why this is really different. Doug kind of went through the difference between, CRM, ICM, and SPM. And I want to reiterate it here. With a sales performance management solution, you're really talking about the aggregation, but that is the central point where your entire organization could now go and see the same results, what's important to me, delivered to my desktop, and we're all singing off the same song sheet. You're not going to allow access into an HRIS system or a financial system at the front line anyhow. So why not have this application that's sucking all that data in? It's essentially getting rid of the noise and delivering only what's important to me. And as an agent, that's very different than what's important to my manager, which is very different than what's important to a VP. But yet it all aligns, right? So you've got drill down capabilities up down the organization. And sort of within this cloud, you're really managing the data, applying the business rules and workflow, and then building out the presentation layer. So that's, step two is, of course, aggregating the right data. I talked to Annette from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think she's here, but she gave me the story of data aggravation and really how it was just about kind of getting rid of the noise. So pulling these data sources in, but let's just really focus on what's important. And it's not an easy task, but again, when time's spent doing it, there's a real payoff here. So this gets rid of that number 1 and 2 problem where you've got no visibility, lack of tools, which then lead to unclear goals. This is really addressing number 1 and 2. Okay, so we've set the metrics, we've aggregated the data, we've got to set a baseline and target so we know, what our performance looks like. We've seen this in variations, again, a little bit different bell curve than earlier, but let's talk about some of the considerations. So we'll take a snapshot of today, we'll understand who our non-performers are, what do we do with them, do we manage them out, do we try and give them another chance? But then we've got this group of potential performers, solid performers, whatever you want to call them. American Express calls them the miracle middle, I kind of like that. And then you've got, of course, the top performers. But some considerations in setting, the goals, not just, where do you want people to fall? What percentage do we want in each category? But you really have to, of course, tie that to the compensation spend. So, you've got a pool of money to spend. You've allocated $1 million in compensation this year. What if everybody hit goal? Would you blow your budget by mid-year? So really, of course, connecting, where you want, how you're going to coach, what the expectation of uplift in performance is, and tie that into the allowable compensation spend. And I always like to, of course, talk about the turnover. I mentioned this service to sales transformation. In a year like that, you may have increased turnover because you're really trying to teach a different skill, a sales skill, to people you hired to be a good service agent. So it's okay to have turnover in some cases. So just a lot of considerations as you're setting the baselines. What's your spend? Where do you want people to fall? Are we going through some sort of a unique transformational year, which would really impact where we expect people to fall at the end of the year? And I just think that's important for setting expectations throughout the executive level as you're then going to measure year-end performance. Okay, so we've set the baseline. I really like this slide. I'm not going to take credit for it. I think the Challenger Sale is a book that most people in this room are familiar with, and I actually took this right out of that because I thought it was a good model to use when we're talking about prescriptive coaching. So if we break this down, this is in I think the introduction, and they're talking about the difference, of course, between a transactional type sell versus an enterprise sell, and this is exactly what we mean when we're talking about prescriptive coaching. What's important to me? So Justine Davidson, I think in the room, Callidus sales rep, played volleyball for University of Pennsylvania, outside hitter. Ask her if you think about who is your best coach, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons probably is that coach told her how she individually, very specifically, could improve her game, right? It's not about telling all 9 people on the baseball team to do the same thing. It's not about telling everybody, all 11 on the football field, you've got to do the same thing. We've got to break this down and get very specific. But again, if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the visibility to data, it's hard to do this. A transactional or product selling type person, there's very different expectations and a very different skill set needed to be successful than an enterprise sales rep. So not only, in addition to that, we should say, what we're really seeing now in the market, and I love how we can do this, particularly in like a Callidus type application, is you can start to build in, some of these, the sales process into the coaching, the profile. So I break this down, and whether it's Miller Hyman, whether it's Spin, whether it's Challenger, whatever it may be, and somebody yesterday mentioned this. We love this idea. We love seeing this. I call it the do this, be this. So we're talking about the qualification steps, building those into the coaching profile. There's no reason you can't actually start building in sort of the type of person you need in that role. Build that profile in. So in this particular case, we walk through the qualification steps. This is what Doug and I do every Monday. We jump on our sales call and he's asking me, where are we in certain accounts, going through the qualification steps. But then he really needs to be thinking as well, what type of person does he need in my role, right? As director of sales for Canidium, what does he need a person to be? So that's the be this. So he should be doing that in ride-alongs. We partner on meetings all the time. So whether he's doing this in an application on his iPhone, iPad, whatever, whether he's logging it somewhere else, we really should be building in the profiles of the type of person we need in that role. And of course, now you've collected all this data and it becomes a lot more objective, right? So at the end of the quarter, end of the month, however often you're doing performance reviews with your sales organization, you've collected this data. Yeah, it may be a manual input, but you're doing ride-alongs anyhow. So just build those into the profile, and now you really start to quantify, and it becomes an objective measure rather than a subjective measure of that person's performance. So we're really starting to see companies break this down into the coachable behaviors, adding those into a sales profile. Okay, so step 5, measure the results. Here's where it gets fun, right? Anybody watch Biggest Loser? I do. I like it. What's the most exciting part about the show? Anybody? For me, it's the weigh-in, right? The result. So they've worked their butt off, they've been in the gym, they've eaten the right foods, and that's fantastic. But if there was no measurable result, if they didn't jump on that scale and they didn't see that they've lost 34% of their body weight after however many months, it's the weigh-in that gets people excited. That's the emotion. That's where they laugh, they cry, they hug their family. People just want to see their numbers. Again, salespeople were driven by money and numbers, right? Money was, I think, 91% in Peter's work, in the data, but a significant people just want to see the results, right? So are we doing that with our salespeople? If you just show them results on a regular basis, doesn't that drive performance? It's the Griffin effect, the self-motivation. So sure, we dangle incentives out there, the compensation, but this is probably even more important in like a contact center role, back office type sales role. Just show them data on a regular basis. They want to be competitive too. I love showing rankings myself. Culturally, that doesn't fit into some organizations, some it does, but people just want to see numbers. So measure the result, show them, and I love when we then take the results out, take the performance data out of the coaching application, and then plug that into your ROI model, right? So this is where you really connect the dots for a CFO or somebody in finance that on the front lines, operationally, and on our sales organizations, we are making an impact. Here's what it means to the bottom line or the top line of the company, right? So pretty basic stuff, step 5, but these are the types of initiatives that we help companies with at Canidium. I think most of you know us as a systems integrator. We've been integrating Callidus and other ICM products for quite a while, but there's a lot that we're doing outside of that now as well. So the good news here, we've walked you through kind of a process. We've talked a lot about coaching. What we're really excited about, and actually I laughed at this when Leslie made the announcement, I cannot keep this slide updated with Callidus. I just can't. This needs to be like the real-time ticker we saw yesterday. Because there's acquiring companies left and right. CPQ's not even on here, and now all of a sudden we've got six-figure salaries. So I'll promise to do a better job, Callidus, of keeping this updated, but it's nearly impossible. But the point being here, companies like Callidus are really driving the market. So Doug started off with a slide about SPM. We talked about the sales life cycle. I talked about a process for managing performance. The good news is it's not nearly as difficult as it used to be, right? You've got one application now that connects you to the rest of the sales cycle. You've got a great coaching application here. So the technology, really has come to fruition. I think 4 or 5 years ago, ICM vendors called themselves SPM, and some still do. But the reality is there's only a few who really, truly have sales performance management. And Callidus certainly is one of them. Okay. So best practices, you've seen this. I love flipping this on its head. We'll do this later today and not talk so much about the best practices, but let's talk about what not to do in a coaching implementation. I think that's generally more interesting. But a lot of these you saw from Peter, a lot of these are just, as we bring this to life for companies, this is what Doug and I experience. And by far the most important one, there's a great story, a large healthcare company. They have about 2,000 agents. They would be considered probably a premier performer in the coaching, they'd be in the right distribution curve. And they say absolutely hands down, and this is a no-brainer, but let's think about why. You've got to have corporate support. You've got to have the funding, right? Everything, this doesn't come at no cost. You've got to have support. You've got to have budget. You've got to have resources. But, to them, this particular company, and represented in the room, coaching is one of the top 3 corporate initiatives. Every year they put a tremendous focus on coaching, and everybody in the organization is measured on it. So, it starts there. I don't think that's a secret, but we certainly hear that validated. Okay, so yeah, that's great. How do we get them to realize that it's important? It goes right back to the ROI and building the business case, right? So we can talk about it. We can talk about the impact of coaching. But when you actually put an ROI model, and this is what I've loved about the Callidus sales team, in the past year, they're not just building ROI models based on an ICM implementation. They're doing ICM plus coaching. When you really start to see the impact that coaching can have, the coaching ROI itself could pay for the entire bundle of product. So when you start to put those numbers in front of a CFO or an executive on the IT or business side, that's when you build your business case. We always have somebody in kind of the director, VP level say we want to do it, but it gets left on the cutting room floor, right? We've got 5 initiatives. How do we really prove the value of this? We help a lot of companies go through, build a business case out that's rock solid. So that's step 1, is just building a good business case that you can present. So a ton of best practices here. We're glad to spend more time, but 1, I want to give you time back because I know we're running a little over, and 2, you've heard all this over the past couple of days. So let's just leave you with a few of our key takeaways, and then I think we'll wrap up with any Q&A or any questions specifically about our company or Doug. We heard this yesterday. We're seeing it, not to be redundant, but let's just point it out as we kind of come into the last day of this. SPM has been validated. That's good for all of us in the room. What do we mean by that? People are recognizing that this links directly to your strategic, high-value initiatives that drive top line. What many of you in the room should be really interested in is you should want to connect yourself to these initiatives, right? Why wouldn't you want to connect yourself to, a high-value, ROI-driving initiative? So it's been validated. The technology is now there. I think that's point 3, actually. Just gave that away. But, it's a real deal. It probably wasn't so much a few years ago. People were talking a lot about it, but we didn't know what that meant necessarily. So it's real. The business case is there. Just talked about that. Glad to help anybody who needs some ideas on a business case. And then, of course, the technology suite is now available. So you don't have to have 5 or 6 different applications that you're trying to thread together. You've got vendors like Callidus in the space who are doing that for you. So those are some of our key takeaways. And with that, Doug, I'll turn it back over to you.
So I wanted to take just one moment, and we heard Leslie talk about people and congratulate people and give them recognition. I wanted to take 1 minute of our time here to call out 3 people at Callidus that have been incredibly beneficial to our organization, and I can see you right over there. I'm going to talk about you, it. Our relationship with Callidus has really been great. And it's because of these three people. I want to say Derek Russ, who really helped us start our Callidus relationship, the CallidusCloud, with Meredith Calvert, of course, who's getting highly embarrassed and red right now, I'm sure. Always been great working with you, Meredith, and we really, from the bottom of our heart, just love working with you. And Rory Cameron, who has helped us immensely as an organization, from guidance and just being there and helping us understand the vision of Callidus and how we can be part of that vision. And so I really wanted to take this time to thank those three people specifically, because we always, we do hear about the Eric Browns and we hear about, the Leslies and everybody else who gets congratulated. But I wanted to make sure that these three people who are really critical to us get recognized for they're just great people. They really are. So I'd like to say, are there any questions that anybody has specifically around this? And if there's one thing I'd like you to take away, we just went into coaching quite a bit. And there's a lot of people in here that do incentive compensation management who are on the IT side. That's a lot of the carryover. And I think in talking with people, we went through ROI analysis, and it's understanding how coaching can then benefit you more, because you're not just taking it from a cost reduction perspective. When you start hitting the top line and explaining to people, like Dave just said, the top line revenue piece, you really get that justification. And we see that with a lot of people now that are going into these systems. You're not just looking at shadow accounting, you're not just looking at error reduction, you're not looking at dispute resolution and reducing workflow. Everybody tries to do that. When you start hitting those top line numbers, bam, you've got your justification. Any questions? Dan Giles in the front row, who paid attention. Come on now, I know you got something. I make fun of Dan. I was with him last night.
Okay.
All right, great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.